And of course, let's get into this conversation now, looking at this particular ZEP issue and the impact of this new extension, which is going on until the 31st of December. We're now joined by Eisenberg and Associates immigration lawyer Gary Eisenberg, who joins us live now. Thank you so much, Gary, for your time this evening. As you know, Canny ends off her package there. It is where I'd like us to begin. The decision comes as the court is yet to make a ruling on this particular matter. So how then do these waters begin to be navigated? Should these be seen in isolation?
No, I think you perhaps are looking at quite a long distance still to run. We don't know when the judgment is going to be handed down. The court, of course, knows that the last deadline was set at the end of June 2023, and everybody's sensitive about that deadline and expected the judgment to come out before the end of this month. Now, if it goes against the Zimbabwean community, the ZEP community, perhaps the parties, the losing parties, may decide to appeal, extending the time frame of even greater uncertainty. And I don't think the minister had a choice in the matter, politically, humanitarianly, in every other way, to give a new runway to the ZEP community of a further 6 months to see how this is all going to play out. But it does look like, and I've listened very carefully to what the minister had to say, what he had to say, I support 100%. I think everybody does. But we are really playing with the lives of hundreds of thousands of people and the inability of these people to sit down with their families and plan for the future. This is not a possibility. And this is very dehumanizing, understanding the problems that, a legacy problem, in fact, that this government has to contend with.
And I suppose that then, you know, while the judgment is still not out and the possibility of an appeal and the possibility then of another extension exists, it could further then, you know, dehumanize them, as they still then would not even know, even if it's extended to next year, June, they wouldn't know what to do.
Well, I think this has been the problem all along. It's been playing along through space and time in fits and starts. The sort of Damocles hanging over every head belonging to this ZEP community, not only made up, we should remember, of ZEP holders, but what about undocumented children, spouses, dependents? The community is much larger than 180,000. I have no doubt about that. It could range anywhere from 250 to 500,000 people. And these people are kept at the edge of a humanitarian precipice. The minister is very much aware of this. Government, the state, is aware of this potential explosion, this humanitarian crisis. And I must say they are contending with a very serious situation. I think it's unprecedented in this country. And people should be politically and legally and from a humanitarian perspective, very sensitive and very careful moving along.
And how then do they begin to, you know, make sure that the right kind of sensitivity is applied here, particularly, as you say, you know, that there is just so much at stake here. But at the same time, the country says that it is trying to make sure that everyone in the country is accounted for.
Well, again, and I've said this recently publicly, it is a question of sovereignty. What constitutes South African sovereignty? Of course, the state is the final arbiter of who crosses our borders and who remains as an inhabitant of this country, who remains as an undocumented person and who gets a status in terms of our legislation, our immigration legislation or refugee legislation. The state makes those determinations, but the state must also comply with legal requirements, be they constitutional, legislative. And it was the claim of the Helen Suzman Foundation in this case that before the government decided to terminate the ZEP program, they didn't comply with a consultative requirements of legislation, of PAJA, really of the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act. And therefore it is a question of legal compliance. But again, legal compliance is one thing. Another element is education. There's been a tremendous amount of misinformation fed into the system, where people originally were talking about waivers. What do waivers actually mean? What are they for? Nobody was told, and the Department of Home Affairs, if I can just say this, didn't do a very good job in enlightening the public, especially the ZEP community, of what these waivers were all about. It is education, and it's educating everybody to understand what these deadlines mean and the consequences, so that people can make informed determinations about their futures and about their children's futures in this country, as any family would want to.
And is it clear, on that point of even education, is it clear, to your earlier point, what happens then to, a ZEP holder who has a spouse in the country, who has children in the country? Is it clear what happens to the spouse and the children who are, would have been with a ZEP holder?
The Department of Home Affairs has not disseminated any information about that. So people remain in the dark. And even with regard to interpretations of the Immigration Act itself, it is not very clear. If a person has a ZEP, what does a spouse apply for or a child apply for? That information is not in the public domain, and the Department of Home Affairs has spent absolutely no effort, no endeavor to educate people as to what they are to do in those circumstances.
And Gary, as a final question then, how then do employers begin to navigate these waters? Because let's say December comes and somebody still has not been able to have their application processed in time. Do they simply let them go, or what does an employer do?
Well, I think what the minister seems to suggest is once a ZEP holder submits his or her application for a visa or a waiver is a preparation for a general work visa on the basis of an offer of employment. Holding that receipt in the person's hand is probably sufficient for banks to keep bank accounts open and for employers to continue employing the receipt holders. That's the way it should work. And I think the Department of Home Affairs would support that position entirely.
Gary, thank you so much for just your, enlightenment in some of these issues, because, legal matters do from time to time require us to tap into the knowledge of those who know. Thank you so much. We do appreciate your time this evening. That was Eisenberg and Associates immigration lawyer, Gary Eisenberg.